Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life, episode 209. My name is NBZ, and I've been going around in circles, Bally, back and forth. It's almost like I'm going through a wheel of time.
I was literally about to say, how many takes does it have to be before we're stuck in the wheel of time?
Yeah, exactly, because I've been trying to redo this intro multiple times, and here I am at the start of this show. But it was, it's a world we live in now, Bally, that I have seen episodes of a television show that I've been waiting for quite a long time. And it's very exciting. It's out in the world. I'm excited about it. And I hope people...
You're pretty satisfied so far?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, generally pretty happy. There's some issues, of course, as there always will be. But yes, I think that I'm excited to see what people think of this series, because it is a very long, very renowned book series that a lot of people have read over the years. Over 90 million copies sold of the original books altogether. And a lot of writing, a lot of words. It's one of those series that there's definitely stuff you can condense, and I think that Amazon will be doing that with their adaptation. Mm-hmm. So looking forward to it. But so we're here to not talk about that, but to talk instead about video games, and Nintendo ones and not Nintendo ones and other stuff going on in the industry, all that fun stuff. So yeah, Bally, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited for the end of the year. Like I might prefer it to E3 in some ways, especially these kind of last two E3s, which have been a bit botched and, lots of announcements. So like just this time of year where you got time off work to play games, to record podcasts, and there's game awards, and everyone's got their game of the year list. We're going to do ours. Like it's all, I just love that time of year. It's just so like refreshing.
Yes, yeah. You've been playing a game of your own. Obviously, last week we played Unpacking, but this week you've been doing depacking of some kind. So
just sorting out my parents' house. Oh, it's so much fun. Yeah, it's hard work, and unpacking is a lot more fun.
It's life mimics art. That's what happens. It always happens that we'll find something that is in a video game, and then you end up doing it in reality.
Exactly.
And,
it was weird that Unpacking came along at the time that it did, because I kind of played it and then started this project, which was very strange. It's just weird how things like that happen in life.
Of course. But we're here to talk about some stuff and video games. A little bit different show today, but Bally will tell you about that right now.
Yeah, we've been a little bit light on the amount of Nintendo or Nintendo Switch things we've been playing at the moment. So we're going to do an email segment for the first segment. And then, of course, our second segment is our Backlog Club, where we're going to be talking about the Sega Genesis game. It's Genesis if you're UK, right?
It's Mega Drive.
Mega Drive UK. Damn it. Genesis for everyone else, I think, or North America.
For the US, yeah.
US,
for the US,
so we've been playing Ristar, and we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, it's a cool little game, very interesting, fun one that obviously people voted on, and we will chat about it in depth. But I think this is the second show ever where we haven't had a What You've Been Playing segment, and I believe the first time we did it was also a Backlog Club episode, so there you go, people.
Blame Phil Spencer again, because...
always. It's always his fault.
Releasing Halo and Forza in the space of like a month.
I mean, I don't know, we've been busy, you've been very busy as well.
I've been incredibly busy, yeah.
So.
We did talk about like a record number of games last episode as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's probably a record.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to kick things off with some emails. And obviously you can send your emails in to let us know what's going on. Bally, where can they send those emails to?
Please send them to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We are always in need of more emails. And at this time of year, we are in need of your Game of the Year emails. We want your Nintendo games of the year, your non-Nintendo games of the year. We want your top 10 games of the year that didn't actually come out this year. We want them all. And, we really enjoy reading through them all.
Yeah, absolutely. So send those through. We'll probably touch on a few when we go through our lists next time, and then the subsequent episode. And it'd be good to get a pulse on the community and see what everyone's favorite stuff they played this year was. So go ahead and send those through, and obviously head over to Discord and you can post them in there as well. And we'll take a look. So let's kick things off, Bally. Who's our first email today?
Our first email is from Flapjack, and this was actually on Discord, who says, "Been a while since I dropped a comment, but I finally thought of a good one. Looking at my my old collection of Nintendo magazines made me remember the old Nintendo forums from way back when. While Nintendo has held an okay social media presence, do you think they could do better? Do you think a revived Nintendo forums could survive nowadays? Or if Nintendo made their own social media site, if it could hold up among the giants of Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook? I'm excited to hear your responses.
Well, Nintendo did that, and they killed it. It was called the Miiverse. It was a sacred. It was a sacred place where Nintendo fans could just, just be fanboys, and there's great memes born from the Miiverse. Why can't Metroid crawl? Prophecy, you might say, that comment in particular. But yeah, lots of fun stuff from the Miiverse that I enjoyed. Remember the guy who just posted about the water of every video game? He was like, nice water for every game. And I enjoyed the Miiverse a lot. I think there's a particular reason why it didn't work out. Obviously, it was kind of built by Nintendo for their own platforms, which means that they had a heavy kind of moderation thing going on, and they tried to moderate it, and oftentimes did fail because there were a lot of dicks on Miiverse that I did see, and not every Nintendo ninja can get all the dicks out of their social media space. So that's one tough part. I think also if you look at their history of stuff like the Flipnote debacle, where people were very afraid of people being contacted, and there was a whole situation, I think, with like someone getting molested or something through the Flipnote, or there was like some predator on there who someone was contacting, and Nintendo just shut down the entire thing. And so I think they kind of realized during that era that maybe making your own social media platform has a few problems and issues that they didn't want to repeat and didn't want to run into. And then you kind of directly see that with the Switch, where they're like, Twitter integration is here out the box, and you can post stuff directly there. We'll have hashtags built into it. You can post to Facebook, you can post to these other places. And I think that's kind of the direction they went in. Like, would they do this again? I don't think so. I'd be interested to kind of like see a attempt at it, or to see what they would like to do. But I would see them more doing like a forum thing, I guess, or like something where a community has access to, like, probably not in Nintendo's case, but I could see like some of their Western studios maybe doing something like that, like Next Level or Retro. But a lot of it is just secrecy, right? And I think that's the hard part of it. Like, there's a lot of, if you look at like Destiny, for example, right, I'm pretty sure they have like communities, like official forums and stuff that you can go to. And I think a lot of these other companies do that, where fans congregate in these spaces, and there's not a huge number of people who usually gravitate towards that stuff. It's usually the very hardcore people who go there. But I do think that, there's potential for Nintendo to do it, but I just don't think they're up to it at this point in time. I don't think they just don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought the Miiverse generally was actually pretty great. I mean, my biggest issue with it was actually just the loading times, and then the loading times on 3DS were even worse. But as a means of Nintendo fans communicating with each other about Nintendo games, I think it kind of did that really well, actually. And the majority of posts were well, like, marshaled and regulated and all these things, and there were definitely just a lot of kids on there.
Then you had like the meme communities, like the Funky Barn community that I remember around launch of the Wii U. Jeff Gerstmann was in there doing some Funky Barn like image drawing, and there was the Netflix community where people would. There was just a lot of funny posts that people put in there.
The fact you could join a community and then see the top posts in that community, and you could always go to the top post, and then people would comment on top posts, and like, it kind of worked. And like, aside from the awful loading times, and it got really clunky and annoying, it was just a very clunky system generally, but like, for what it was trying to do, it kind of succeeded. I would love for Nintendo to try something like that again on Switch, but like you say, I don't think they like the, with great power comes great responsibility, and the amount of pressure that sites like Facebook and Twitter are under now to, like, not host far right accounts and host potential terrorists and all these other things that all these social media sites have become famous for. It kind of like, they want to like shirk all that responsibility, and I think that you're right. They probably would be very scared to like set foot in it again. And anyway,
Right.
why would you want a community when you can where everyone can talk to each other, when you could just upload a YouTube video, turn the comments off, and now that people aren't going to be able to dislike your video, you can just put out you can just broadcast to the world without any criticism whatsoever.
I could go on a whole fucking diatribe about that YouTube thing. Jesus Christ. But yeah, no, I totally get that, and I think Nintendo have always been one of those companies who they do listen clearly at some point, but like for a lot of the time it feels like there is this real disconnect between them and Nintendo fans, and I think Miiverse still had that feeling of a disconnect, even though there were like, oh, here's Miyamoto's account on here and he's drawing this Mario, and then there's Enuma and you follow him, and he would post like in the Miiverse an update on Breath of the Wild or whatever before it came out, which I thought was cool, but it always felt like there wasn't any kind of direct way of interacting, and I am sure Nintendo don't really want that. Like they like their game designers and the people who work there to be like magic wizards, right? Like they are people who just create these video games out of nothing, and
they're up in the castle working on their mysterious ways, and every 3 years they pop out an incredible video game, and then everyone goes, wow. Yeah, it's
like, you know, like when you think about stuff like patch notes, right? Like you can imagine on the Destiny forums, you know, someone from the community team going on there and being like, hey guys, here are the changes. Here's like a breakdown of every patch and every update. Meanwhile, Nintendo would go on Twitter and say, there have been some balance changes made to Super Smash Brothers for Wii U, and people are scrambling to be like, they made like 900 changes and no one knows what the fuck they are, and this is totally fucked up everything, and the metagame has to change. And yeah, it's a very different approach to dealing with an audience, and I think that's at the end of the day what this comes down to is like Nintendo's hands-off approach with their audience and their fan base means that I just find it unlikely that they do anything close to a forum. Like Miiverse was in some steps like removed because it was mainly just drawing stuff. You could type things out, but there was like a hard character limit, and you could post screenshots, but like it was very limited in its functionality. Like you couldn't really have a good conversation on Miiverse in the same way that you go onto a regular internet forum. And you know, not to say that you can have any good conversations on internet forums, certainly not saying that in this day and age, but you could certainly try to actually communicate with somebody. Whereas I think on Miiverse, that's communication not necessarily a thing that was that easy, I would say.
No, it wasn't the best. And I think a lot of the video game obsessives who want to speak to other people who are really into video games go on places like Discord and communities in there, and you know,
right. If anything, I see Nintendo like doing a bit more of that integration. For God's sake, they've added Twitch for some reason to Switch like 4 years into its life cycle, so you can watch Twitch on there now, which is baffling and bizarre, but okay, I'm sure that makes sense to them for some reason putting it on now, and you still can't get Netflix for some reason. Like it's, yeah, the app stuff on Switch is just a whole strange thing that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially given that in the past they've had a bunch of that stuff on their systems, and who knows why things go on there. You know, like the Bluetooth audio thing was another thing they added late. It's just like, have any idea why any of this happens, when it happens? No, not a clue. But Nintendo just decides, we want a marketing beat today, how about let's just do this thing.
Do you think Nintendo could do better with their existing like social media, like say Twitter, for example?
I think Nintendo of America do a pretty decent job. You know, like they have fun things, like they were memeing on Paper Mario when that came out with the water, and they also did a thing where like Wario takes over the Twitter account and stuff like that. They have fun with it, like
stuff.
There's like a bunch of Toad stuff that they've done in the past. Like they definitely, I think at least the North American social media team have a good pulse on like the internet to some degree. But yeah, I don't think that, like, for example, if Nintendo were to bring back the Miiverse, or if they were to do their own kind of social platform, from the beginning, I think it would have to be accessible on, like, phones and on desktops, right? Like, I don't think you can have something that is... And Miiverse was, but you couldn't really post, I believe, from a desktop onto Miiverse. You could only, like, browse it. And so you could look at stuff, but you weren't able to actually make direct posts to the Miiverse from those other spaces. Whereas I think now, just, like, the way people interact with, like... phones and with the way they are online, it just makes too much sense for it to just have to be there in an accessible way. But also, I think Nintendo would also just build it into their system at a system level so that you had access. And I think a lot of it would have to be similar to how like the eShop functions today, where you don't have to close your game to access it. It's always open and it loads up without having to worry about that stuff, and it's fast and it's fluid and it doesn't lag things out. I like the implementation. I think that the fun thing about Miiverse and why it was a bit more unique was because they could implement it into game systems as well, right? Whether it was Wind Waker with the bottles and finding messages from people in-game, or in New Super Mario Bros. U where people would post stuff. Mario Maker, the original one on Wii U, had a lot of that stuff where you'd finish a course and you would do a drawing. And I think some of that stuff like made it across. Splatoon especially is one where some of those ideas and that DNA continued in terms of the drawing community and the art community from Splatoon 1 on Wii U, from Miiverse stuff. Obviously you can do that in Splatoon 2. I'm not sure if you can do the Mario Maker stuff as well, but maybe you can. I can't remember. But yeah, it feels like they took a lot of the ideas that people liked from that thing and put them into some of the games that, you know, carried over onto the Switch. But
yeah.
At the end of the day, yeah, I don't see it happening. I think it'd be fun, but yeah, I just don't think Nintendo cares anymore. I think they're at a different place now as a company, right? They feel, I think, a little more removed as well. Like with Furukawa at the helm, he seems like he's much more a behind-the-scenes guy, not out front like Iwata talking to people. And a lot of their decisions, feel a little more disconnected at this point in time. So, yeah. Makes sense.
Good question, Flapjack. That's a good one. Our next email is from Andrew, who's from Melbourne in Australia. Says, "Hi everyone, I've only recently started listening to the podcast. I tried it out after getting frustrated and annoyed with the other Nintendo podcasts I was listening to, and then I tested out a few before settling on this one, and I'm really enjoying it." He's got 3 questions. Question number 1. Nintendo bangs on about not having new ideas with F-Zero, but most of their games are remakes or re-releases. Mm-hmm. So true. Why do you think there is hesitation in either remaking, re-releasing, or making another F-Zero game? I just like them to remake F-Zero X.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this a little while ago, but I think a lot of, like, why do things come back? What is the reason that, Metroid Dread has finally happened after 19 years? A lot of it is finding a champion within Nintendo to get behind an IP, right? Like, and there is part of it that is, okay, yeah, this probably won't sell very well, and, there hasn't been one in years, and is there a fan base for it anymore? That definitely stops Nintendo, I think, in a lot of ways, and it's why there's this two-facedness of like, oh, but we can't think of any ideas for F-Zero. Anyway, here's the new Animal Crossing. It's super different. You can do everything you did before, but now you can put furniture outside now. Hey, it's super different now. Anyway, that's where they're at, right? Where it's like, well, yeah, Animal Crossing, they don't need to make excuses for having no new ideas because it sells fucking 30 million units, right? Whereas F-Zero is like, well, are we going to be able to sell this thing if we don't have a unique gimmick or a unique twist to it? I think a lot of that is like the Miyamoto DNA in the company of him always wanting to have an idea for a game before they put something out there. It's a lot of how their console design works. It's a lot of how their like game ideas come about. It's like, we want something different and we want to base a whole idea about this and see how it does. And so I think, I would love to see them test the waters, and you see them doing this with Advance Wars, with doing the remasters for that, of being like, okay, here we go, let's see how this does. Same with Samus Returns. It's like, all right, before we commit to a brand new one, let's just do a remaster. And so I think, if anything, that's the most likely thing to happen with F-Zero, is to do like a GX remake, right?
Yeah, I think we're totally due like that kind of testing the waters game, and whether that's a GX remaster or a new game that is almost the same as those games but doesn't actually reinvent the formula too much. I think we're definitely due something like that. And as you say, it is ultimately a gamble for them. Like, they don't want to invest something in like developing this game if it's not going to give them big, a big paycheck at the end of the day. Yeah. And they can gamble on some other properties that they think are more likely to stick. Maybe this time they thought Advance Wars does have more potential. And like you said, MZ, maybe like Way Forward were just available and keen to work on that game in a way that
Exactly,
other
right.
teams weren't keen on working on F-Zero. Like it's just who's available at what time.
They were a champion for that game, right? Like Sakamoto is for Metroid, like so many other people within the company are for different franchises.
Yeah.
If you don't have someone who really wants to make it at the end of the day, and a team that like wants to get behind it, obviously you need to have the funding and the backing of Nintendo to actually go behind it and greenlight it, but you kind of have to have that in the first place in order to get it on the road, right? And just doesn't seem, especially when you think about like Sega were the people who made GX, right? Like it was outsourced after the first couple of games that Nintendo had a hand in. It feels, because it wasn't a sales success, and also just doesn't feel like anyone internally at the company was there for it. It kind of died as a result. So yeah.
But I feel like we are close to the stars aligning, and there could be some sort of F-Zero game. But it feels like not imminent. But I'd put money on the next 3 years we'll get something, because
I
a
think
lot of
so.
stuff is coming back for Switch.
Yeah, and I'm really curious about, at the end of the day, how well does Metroid Dread perform? Because when you think about it, ultimately, Metroid Dread is just a very good Metroid game, right? Like, it doesn't attempt to do anything wildly radical. Like, it has new ideas. There are things that are interesting, and it streamlines a lot of the kind of movement and mobility stuff, which I love and I think is great. But really, it's just kind of more of what people wanted, and it's just a very, very good more of what people wanted, which I think is the crux of it, right? If they can make very, very good F-Zero that people really like, I think that that's good enough, and I think that is what people will gravitate towards, because there are so many people, tons of people who've never played a Metroid game before, who are playing Dread and are like, wow, I never realized that this is a series I could get into, or it's something that, you know, I wanted to try out because everyone was trying it and it seemed like a fun thing to jump on top of. I think F-Zero can totally build up that word of mouth and that excitement, and I think it's just like trying to find ways to make it a bit more accessible to people. It's ironic because Metroid Dread, I think, is like goes in the opposite direction of like, hey, this is fucking hard actually, so a lot of people are struggling with it. But I do think that F-Zero in particular is notorious for being impossibly hard, so I think that ways in which that you can, you know, even take a note out of Forza's book, right? Look how good Horizon is doing, given all of its features and the way that it's speaking to a wider, more mainstream audience who aren't necessarily into regular, like, realistic racing games. You know, a rewind feature in F-Zero would be a fucking godsend, honestly. Like, that would be such a big deal that I think would make a lot more people interested in playing that game, because it allows it as an accessibility feature to just go to more people, and more people to pick it up and check it out. So, yeah.
Question number 2 from Andrew says, should games like F-Zero or Mario Kart stick to what makes them fun in racing, or could Nintendo mix it up with racing and other objectives? When I'm racing, I always look at the track and want to get off the cart and go and explore. I've always thought it'd be fun to mix it up with racing and other objectives to find or get, etc.
Yeah, not to talk about Forza again, but I mean, like, that's kind of what that game does, right? Like, I think a lot of the fun I've been having with it is going and finding experience boards and fast travel points, and just, like, not actually doing the races, but just driving around and feeling the joy of driving while you have these mini things that you hit off a checklist, right? And I think I've always been a fan of the idea of an F-Zero game that has, like, open world elements to it, where you have this big, you know, metropolis, like this giant, like, space city that you're exploring in your vehicle. And, you know, maybe the idealized version of this game would be like you jump out the vehicle, like Grand Theft Auto style, and it's more of an open world action game where you play as Captain Falcon and you go around and you do combat and stuff like that. Like, that's a pipe dream. It's never going to fucking happen. But, like, even if it was the base idea of just being in the vehicle the whole time and exploring a space, like a planet, right? That would be awesome. And I think you could do a lot of cool stuff with it, like having, you know, the outer bounds of a city that's more open and flat, and you can find, like, places to explore and secrets and stuff like that, but then also have the racing alongside it, and so having races that you enter and a storyline that you follow alongside being able to go out there and just find little bits, like, you know, ways to, you know, get new vehicles and you know, customization elements, like stuff like that. I think people would eat up, and I think is a unique enough twist, if Nintendo is so fucking in love with the idea of doing something quote unquote new with F-Zero so they can make a new one, I think that would be a great call, honestly. Like having a game that is a bit more exploration focused. You know, you're seeing this happen a bit more with some of Nintendo's franchises. Like, oh, we're going to do a 3D Kirby game now. Never done this before. So I feel like it's possible. And I don't think it'll go the whole way, but you know, if we see the success of a remake of something being like, okay, we are coming back with F-Zero, enough of you seem to like this thing, then there's a possibility that it goes in that direction. And yeah, I love the idea of a Diddy Kong Racing style thing where you have bosses that you fight against, and like it's almost the Mario Kart DS mission structure.
Yeah.
It's a very similar idea. Have you played, I don't know if you've played any other kart racing games that do that kind of stuff. Like I played the Sonic and Racing All-Stars Transformed, which is more by the numbers in terms of Mario Kart stuff,
Right.
but it has
I don't think
like
I have played any others that I can think of. Really.
it has like
Nothing
challenges
such
and stuff. I guess Lego Racers back in the day was pretty basic in terms of
Yeah.
its stuff, but yeah, I don't remember. I think maybe one of those games. Maybe I'm just merging Lego Island and Lego Racers in my head. But like that was a game that had obviously Lego Island had lots of exploration and stuff in it. But
I must admit, when Andrew mentions like quote unquote mix it up and Nintendo doing this with something, all I can think of was like Mario Golf Super Rush, and they just decided to start running around the course, and I was like, no, I don't want it. Sometimes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's people who love that golf game for all the running around the course, but I personally don't like the running around the course. So the idea of like getting out the cart and exploring, like I'm not so sure, but I think your idea, MBZ, of like, you know, F-Zero, but you know, zooming around Mute City, just open world, and then just entering in like races, and if they can mix it up with like doing extra other missions and fun things like Forza Horizon, like you say, I think that would be fantastic. Yeah, so have that for creativity, Miyamoto. We can bring back F-Zero, you know. Come on, just
It's not even that creative. We're just fucking ripping off Grand Theft Auto, you know.
yeah,
like,
exactly. I mean, before Breath of the Wild came out, someone said, yeah, they're going to make Zelda open world, by the way, and that's going to be the way they mix up the formula. I think everyone would have predicted, like, they would have been like, oh, that doesn't sound good. And then they just did an entire Nintendo twist on the formula. And it's like, again, Nintendo they can work their magic to just do twists on formulas that you think are aging or you think can't be reinvented again. And why not do it with F-Zero? I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, my only worry with that is like Nintendo are not well known for their like character building or like story chops. And so I think a game like that kind of, I would want a Western studio under Nintendo to develop it, you know?
That leads perfectly into Andrew's next question.
All right.
Which is, I'm a big fan of the Ace Attorney series. I'm not sure why Nintendo never experimented with a Detective Mario spin-off. Do you think that concept would work? And then thanks, Valley and MBZ, for a great podcast. It's Andrew from Melbourne, Australia.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Obviously they made Detective Pikachu, the video game.
Right.
That was story-driven, and people seem to like, and I mean, the story of that movie is based on that game at the end of the day.
It's a
like
good story. I thought it was
pretty much the same thing. So, yeah, maybe. Like, I do like the idea of them leaning into more visual novel-style stuff. Obviously, we saw them bring back Famicom Detective Club this year, which was great. Love to see those games come back, but at the end of the day, they're little, in terms of their mechanics and, like, their age really shows in that way. So like having a modern take on a detective style game would be really cool, and there's ways that you can do it well. Like there are certain games that have detective mechanics that feel a little superfluous. Like I would say the Judgment series kind of falls into this, where like there's detective stuff they try to do with that game, but it kind of comes down to you're stuck in first person mode and you have to zoom in on objects and just click them, and all of the answers are obvious, so there's not a lot of deduction going on, ranging all the way to stuff like Return of the Obra Dinn, which I personally found a bit too challenging in the deduction end of it and just kind of bounced off it as a result. So I think there's like a nice balance you can find with those types of mechanics. And I think, I don't know, is Mario the best character for this idea? I feel like there's maybe someone else in Nintendo stable who could do a better job, probably like from a branding perspective, just because Mario's been a doctor, he's been a golfer, he's played tennis, right? He's done all these different jobs, so like putting a detective hat on him and sending him out on the streets, the mean streets of New York, probably works branding wise. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Mally?
It's kind of like Mario's interesting because you kind of think about like Nintendo's roster of characters, and what are the games where characters from the Mushroom Kingdom are given the most character? And I actually think two games in particular. I think one is the Paper Mario series, and that's
Yes.
a lot. That's a lot through like writing and this sort of thing. But that could definitely, there's aspects and characters in that series that could link to something that's more detective related. And the other one, the other Nintendo like Mushroom Kingdom world that I think has the most character, and we've said this before, is Luigi's Mansion 3. And I think there's enough there between those two games that, you know, there's enough
Are
ideas.
you saying, Bally, that Next Level Games should make Detective Luigi as their next game?
Yeah, because they've given the Mushroom Kingdom arguably like this huge injection of like character in a way. Sure, Odyssey's got lots of character in its own way, but nowhere near the levels of like Luigi's Mansion, where you're just kind of like, you really feel it in a way you don't with a game like Odyssey. And I think if a company like Next Level were given, you know, the rights to do something with like Detective Mario, I think they could make something pretty cool actually.
Yeah, I think so. The other one I always jump to, because I'm like, Nintendo, just fucking make a spin-off for this IP already, is Splatoon, right? Like, and I think the fun thing about Splatoon is that, sure, you have some canon characters like Pearl and Marina and Callie and Marie and all that stuff. That's really cool. But the main characters in those games are always like player created, like they're avatars essentially. Like they're all squid kids, and that's cool. I think that's a world that is interesting to dig into and fucking weird and has a lot of stuff going on with it. Like, introduce a detective squid character, like a squid kid detective character who can have their own story and have their own kind of narrative hooks and all that stuff going on. I don't think Nintendo would be able to pull it off. I think they'd probably have to outsource this to some other team, just because I just don't think they have the chops for it. That said, I don't know. The story in Famicom Detective Club games are pretty good, and those came out in like the late 80s, and you know, they held up pretty well, all things considered. So maybe there are some talented writers over Nintendo who could focus a story like that to make it work. But I think that is a really good candidate. I can almost see it now, right? Like the detective hat, the fucking like notepad with the pen. Like I have an image in my mind of like what a detective squid kid would look like, and I think that could give you like a character that you could even put into Smash Brothers, right? Like, what else are you going to add to Smash Brothers from the Splatoon franchise? It's kind of hard to do anyone but your generic squid kid, Inkling, right? So yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. But yeah, I think Detective Mario is a cool idea. I like it. I think Nintendo should get more weird with their IP. That's all I'm saying. Just get weird with it, man.
Let's do it. Good questions, Andrew. Much appreciated. Our final email is from Brett, who is from Minnesota. Says, hello, guys. Big fan of the show. I started listening back in March when I bought a Nintendo Switch, which was my first Nintendo console ever and first Nintendo product since the Game Boy Advance. Listening to your show has got me interested in retro games, and I have recently bought a Wii U and a 3DS in order to play all of the Fire Emblem games. However, upon trying to purchase 3DS games, I learned that these have skyrocketed in value, with Pokemon games and Chrono Trigger fetching $80 to $100 on DS. My question is, with the switch over to digital games, do you see this trend continuing? If so, what games for 3DS, DS, GameCube, or Wii should I get now before it's too late? Thanks, guys. MBZ, you do a ton of, you know,
I especially right now,
monitoring the prices, going to Kex all the time, and checking out these retro games. Got any tips?
Yeah, it's hard. It's definitely one of those things that you kind of have to always have an eye out for. I will randomly from day to day open the 3DS eShop because there's no other way to browse if there's sales going on. And there's no easy way. You can do browse by sales for the Switch eShop on the browser app, but you can't do that with the 3DS. So a lot of the time I'm like, all right, what's on sale on 3DS at the moment? Is there anything good that I want? And I have a list, right? So I think the first thing is make a list of the stuff that you actually want to get, right? Make sure you have it, and it's not overly big. I think if you have it to be too ambitious, you're going to end up being like, well, I want to own the whole library, and that's just not tenable, right? I think for me, you know, there's certainly people out there who are collectors and they want to do that stuff. That's fair enough. For me, it's like, do I want to play this at some point in my life? And I have kind of curated down to a list of like stuff like Fantasy Life or, you know, just like niche 3DS games that I didn't get around to. Ever Oasis was a good example that I did find and was able to pick up, and recently got Final Fantasy Theater Rhythm as well for cheap. So like there are certain games that will go away, especially certain digital games that only came out on the 3DS that are not going to be available anywhere else. Stuff like the Guild 01 and Guild 02 games, things like Aeroporter or Attack of the Friday Monsters, like those games that were made by those individual developers who it was like that entire series was based on this idea of famous developers making really small games and putting them out on the eShop. And I don't think you can find like Liberation Maiden anywhere else. I think Suda worked on Liberation Maiden. I can't remember. I think he worked on one of those games. But those are on my list of as soon as Nintendo banged the gong of the eShop for 3DS is shutting down, I'm instantly going there and I'm buying every Guild 01 and every Guild 02 game because I don't want to miss them, right? And they will not be available.
When's that gong going to be?
It's a good question. Like, they obviously shut down the Wii Shop relatively recently, and that had gone on for a good 15 years or so before they decided to do that. So maybe it was less than that. Maybe it was 12 or something. But it certainly feels like the 3DS is truly dead from their commercial perspective. So it feels like a ticking clock. I give it at least 4 years maybe.
Ooh, wow.
But that's it's closing. I think the window continues to close, and it's one of those bad things that the industry is so bad at keeping its history and making sure that we remember where things come from and making sure people have access to these old games. And the other bummer about 3DS is because proprietary nature of the hardware with the 3D screen, it's impossible to recreate that on an emulator unless you have a stereoscopic display, or if at some point in the future people make 3DS emulators that run in a VR headset because VR has stereoscopic 3D, right? That's the only way I can think of how do you get the experience of playing a 3DS again without having the original hardware, is that stuff, right? So I definitely have a list and have keep a watch on a place like Argos in the UK is a good one of they have a bunch of 3DS games and they always trying to clear out their stock. I always see copies of Mario and Luigi Dream Team, or not that you want to buy that game, I'd highly recommend against that, frankly, because that game's long and just not great. I didn't like it, but
when you bumped into that WarioWare scalper.
Yeah, fucking hell. I don't think I've told the story on the show of so I went to go and buy WarioWare Gold on 3DS because it was a cheap price. It was £5 or something ridiculous at Argos, and I pre-ordered online. I was like, all right, there's one around the corner, I'll go there. I roll up to this place, and there's this motherfucker there who is sitting by the counter with stacks of 3DS games, all copies of WarioWare Gold and a bunch of copies of this other stuff. And I had a right mind to go up to him and be like, I fucking hate you. You're the reason this shit is bad and why people can't get good prices. Bit my tongue, but I was very tempted to just cuss that guy out because he was being a piece of shit buying all that stuff. I was like, are you gonna fucking play those games? Really? Yeah, you're gonna play fucking 7 copies of WarioWare. Fucking hell, man. Pissed me off to no end. So yes, you can certainly go to a lot of different
Maybe
retailers.
He's got 8 kids.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Yeah, this fucking 22-year-old guy, whoever, just definitely wasn't flipping them on eBay at all. So yes, that's the way to kind of do for physical stuff. I would say keep an eye on certain outlets. There's some retailers in the UK that are quite good. I'm sure the US has this as well. But digital, the problem with digital is you never have control of when sales are going to happen. So that's when I always keep an eye out on that stuff. And at the end of the day, if Nintendo do close down the eShop and there aren't any sales and I just have to bite the bullet and buy these things, I will just bite the bullet and buy these things. And I'll set aside £250 or something to just buy everything that I want on the 3DS, just so that I can have it, right? And it doesn't mean I'm going to play it straight away, but the way I to play video games, as you didn't realize, I play a lot of video games on this show and talk about a lot of video games. So and I'm very interested in the history of games and preserving that stuff. And so if I ever want to go back to something, I want to make sure I have the ability to do so. So yeah, I think that's kind of my approach when it comes to this stuff.
I just wait for MBZ to say, Bally, you should get this game. It's on sale. And I'm okay, I'll buy it. And then that's my process. Yeah.
Yeah, Bally does no work at all. He just waits for me to give him all the details.
MBZ does the heavy lifting. I think it's also important to note, don't try and panic too much about maybe Nintendo's bigger first party games, because I know we've waited a long. We still don't have GameCube Virtual Console in any sense, but it will come eventually. We've just seen N64. So if you're talking about the 12 top GameCube games, I wouldn't worry too much about them. You will be able to play those in the next decade. I would put good money
fingers
on.
crossed, man. Who fucking knows? I'm sure they will. Look, Nintendo love reselling their stuff to us, so of course they will. But
same with like Wii. I think there's a good chance.
It's just like the harder stuff to find that worries me. You know, like Chibi Robo. Will they ever put Chibi Robo out again?
100% with the second you're not on that top tier. Definitely, if you're keen to play them, I'd get buying and be aware, like you say, of who's selling what.
And there's even some weird ones, right? Like I think recently on RFN, Greg Leahy was talking about he picked up Kirby's Epic Yarn on 3DS, and like weirdly that game is kind of expensive still. So like there are ports of certain games. Like if I was to play Kirby's Epic Yarn, I probably would pick up the 3DS version because the Wii version is kind of super outdated at this point and not as easy to pick up and play. So like I'm having my eye on that. Like I have my eye on some like versions. Like for example, Donkey Kong Country Returns I already own, but that would be one that is interesting because it's a version of a game that's like probably the best way to play it at this point in time. I think in terms of Wii and 3DS or Wii U in particular, there are a bunch of Wii games on Wii U that you can still download. So if you do want to get those, there's some stuff there that is a little bit tricky to find otherwise. I believe Rhythm Heaven Fever, the Wii Rhythm Heaven, is on there. So like that's a nice deep cut. That's a good one to go after. Obviously you can access the Metroid Prime trilogy on Wii U still. So that's one that everyone realizes that at some point that's going to come over, or at least some form of it will. Who knows? Because people, for some reason, now seem to think that it's just a Metroid Prime 1 remake that's happening instead of a trilogy port, but it's a whole other matter.
Interesting.
And yeah, stuff like Pandora's Tower, like rare stuff, Xenoblade on Wii. They didn't put the last story out. That's one of my like golden gooses. If I was to like find a game on a shop for like 20 quid, if I saw the last story for that, I would pick it up in a heartbeat because that is one of my like I've been chasing for a long time and cannot find it.
You got a top 5 golden gooses?
Man, I don't know if I have top 5, but there's certainly ones on my like Chibi Robo is at the top of my list for sure. So is The Last Story. I think those are kind of my two biggest ones. There's some stuff that I'm interested in, but not to like that degree. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of good stuff. And I think when it comes down to stuff like GBA, for example, the Wii U Virtual Console is great for stuff like Golden Sun and, the Castlevania. They just got the Castlevania Advance Collection, to be fair, so all of those are out there now. But it's the only way to play Metroid Fusion to pay for it at the moment if you didn't have a 3DS ambassador. A lot of people going back to that system just to play Metroid games because a lot of them were available on there. And there's a lot of good stuff on the Wii U Virtual Console. Even if it doesn't have the breadth of what the Wii had, it still has like a good number of games on there and some deeper cuts that you may not expect. So it's worth taking a look around and digging into some of that stuff because
I think it's got a pretty good breadth in terms of number of different consoles it represents. Actually, like it is, the Wii's got a lot in there. When you lob in like N64, GBA, and stuff, it's useful.
For sure. And I don't know, in terms of like what ones are must buys before everything goes away.
Yeah.
I don't know, man, because I think a lot of it comes down to your personal preference. I'm not sure if I have any that I would say are like, you have to own this because it's something like maybe you are into RPGs and maybe Golden Sun is that for you. If you're not, then you don't care about it. So,
I mean, one I went after and actually a listener very kindly gave me their copy was Chrono Trigger on the DS.
Yes,
I played that on my 3DS, and that because that's only been the mobile version's only been emulated, and that's on like PC, right, and stuff. And, that game otherwise hasn't been re-released anywhere, which really sucks because it's a great game.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, some of the, if you want to go deeper cuts in terms of GBA stuff on the Wii U Virtual Console, which is kind of where a lot of my head is at, and like thinking of like what should I pick up if that ever goes away. I think there's Mega Man Battle Network games on there, which again, probably Capcom will do a whole collection of those if they haven't already. I feel like they've already announced a collection of those, but like those exist. I think a lot when it comes to some of these third party things, those companies end up doing their own versions and collections, so there are ways that you'll be able to access them, but it's just hard to find like what are the ones in specific that will go away and then you won't be able to access again. There's not that many. I think stuff like Kuru Kuru Kururin is a good example of that's a super niche weird game on the GBA.
I want to play that game. It looks weird.
Yeah, it's super strange, and like the whole twisting idea and just never stopping. Like I've watched people play that game before, and it seems super fun. Yeah, but I don't know. Basically, my advice is figure out what you want, go buy it when it's on sale. If it's not on sale and you get to the end of the life cycle of the system, if you really do want all those games, set aside a pile of money that you're prepared to live with, to be like, this is all I'm going to spend on it, and I'm not going to go over, and just do it, and then you'll have them, and then you'll be fine. And then you'll regret everything when Nintendo in the next generation puts all of those on a fucking Switch Online service for the second version of that system.
Because they do make random deep cuts. That is the
yes.
risk. They might just randomly deep cut the game you spent a lot of money on.
It's actually one of my favorite things about like the current Switch Online setup is the random games they throw in there. Like I love that.
But it's very random. Very random.
Yeah, super weird stuff.
Thank you very much for your question, Brett. It's good to talk about how to get some retro games.
Absolutely.
That is all we've got time for in this first segment, to talk about your emails. If you would like to send in an email, send in a comment, send in a question, please send them to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Or leave a comment, a question in the channel on our Discord server. Go and join the community over there. We're going to jump into the second segment, where we're going to go into our Backlog Club on Ristar. So don't go anywhere.
All right, folks, welcome back to the second part of today's show. And it's time to dive into a late backlog club, last minute backlog club, you might say, that we decided to do.
Got to get 2 in the year. That's the thing. We've got to get 2 in. So we're squeezing it in.
At least. Yeah, I would love to do more than that. And it's something we should probably plan a bit better. And we'll definitely be doing more next year, including Mario RPG, which is one that we'd promised for this year. But obviously things got very busy. But yeah, we'll try and do that then. But we are today going to be talking about a Genesis game, a Sega game, something new for the show, I think. It's a platform, a company that we don't have a huge amount of history with, and I think part of the cool thing of Nintendo doing the Switch Online stuff is adding Genesis games there, so that people can check them out and dive in a bit more easily. There have been ways to access Genesis stuff in the past. There's lots of collections out there. There's even one on Switch if you wanted to buy that instead of getting the Switch Online service. But I think it's a cool way of showing people some history that isn't directly related to Nintendo, but is in a way, because Sega were, of course, the enemy of Nintendo back in the day. So you could say, if you sent this podcast back to somebody in the mid-90s, they would call you a pariah for a Nintendo show talking about Sega games. But here we are, breaking convention, and it's a cool thing. So yeah, we're talking about Ristar, which I think pronunciation is maybe the first thing I want to get into with this game, because looking and researching a little bit about its history, seems like everyone pronounces it slightly differently. When you first saw the word, Bally, how would you pronounce it when you saw it?
I would go with Ristar just because it's like a star rising, but phonetically, just looking at it, obviously it looks a bit more like Ristar, but the English language always breaks its own rules again and again and again. So I'm going to stick with Ristar.
Yeah, I thought Ristar as well. When I was kind of looking up what people thought, there's kind of a contingent of people who say Ristar. There's a contingent of people who say Ristar. So like there are ways in which you can say this game's name. I think one of the interesting things is that I think it was maybe in the manual or on the game box, there was something that said it's pronounced Ristar, as in like your wrist. And I think part of the reason people thought that is because of the way this game's main mechanic works with your hand, like pulling things, like using your wrists, I guess, to some degree, which is a fun idea. And I don't think, you could make that argument, but I think mainly it is like stretchy arms and hands more so than wrists. But yes, I think the idea of Rising Star actually was another thing that was mentioned when I was kind of looking stuff up. So that makes a lot more sense. We're gonna say Ristar going forward, I think. Makes the most sense here. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we don't have much history with Sega as a platform or like Genesis or anything to that degree. I don't know. What is your kind of knowledge base of Sega's platforms and their games back in the day overall, Bally?
Yeah, not much. Just that Sega is Sonic, and that's that. And for basically the entirety of the time that we've been into games, they've been the company that makes Sonic, Monkey Ball.
They're a third-party publisher as opposed to a first-party console platform. Yeah,
exactly. And the idea that they did used to have their own console, like, is kind of mind-blowing in a way. And yeah, it is interesting to go back and see. Oh yeah, this is like. I'm assuming this was like console exclusive for the Genesis.
Yeah,
right?
Ristar, only came out on that platform, and it was made by Sega themselves, so it never kind of went anywhere else aside from their own systems. Interestingly enough, there was a Game Gear version of Ristar, which was very similar to this, like almost in the vein of like what Nintendo had on Game Boy with like, there are versions of Castlevania that you can play on Game Boy that are similar to the ones that were on the Nintendo and Super Nintendo, and same thing with like Mega Man games, right? Like they kind of try to transplant those ideas onto a smaller screen. And looking up versions or like footage of the Game Gear version of Ristar actually looks pretty good, and as close as you can really get to what the actual Genesis game looked like. But a couple of different changes from it. You actually have stars to collect in it, almost acting like coins, almost like rings, I guess, in a Sonic level. And so that was like an additional collectible thing. And it also, like, when you killed enemies in the Game Gear version, they would sometimes drop items. One of the most cool ones, I thought, was you can pick up a spear from an enemy, throw it at a wall, and then use that spear to swing yourself up, which is a unique, like, interesting way of affecting the kind of the world and getting to different places. So that's pretty neat. But yeah, I guess kind of a bit of the history behind this game is that it's one of the latest era Genesis games out there. It came out in 1995, by which point I believe the Saturn had become a bigger deal and people were kind of moving on, which means that despite the game doing quite well critically, like I think a lot of people enjoyed it when it came out, it kind of got forgotten as a result of the generation moving on, and therefore people kind of leaving it behind and thinking, this is a 2D game, well, I'm all about new stuff now, and people had moved on to what the Saturn was doing and some more 3D style stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of relic of, it's one of those, I guess, thinking of like Wario's Woods or something from Nintendo's perspective of a game that came out super late and no one really got to as a result of it. So that said, it has been represented a lot in collections and things like that. So people have had a lot of chances to go back to this game over the years, and it's been actually quite accessible, which is nice, because there's obviously a lot of more niche games from this era that aren't as easily playable now, but this is one of those that you can find on a lot of different platforms, including the Switch Online service, which is great. One of the fun things about this game development is that originally the idea started that he was going to be a bunny rabbit and that he was going to use his ears to grab stuff, and so that was a potential idea for this game. And the game actually, originally it was going to be called Feel, like as in like feeling something with your hands. That was kind of the core idea behind it. And one of the developers said that the kind of notion behind Ristar as a character is that he was like childlike, and so this idea that he wanted, like a child does, to reach out and touch everything, and that was kind of the concept behind it, of him being like this innocent child who's just like reaching out and touching stuff, which is it's one of the most like Japanese responses to a question of like, how do you come to this idea? It's like, yes, I was thinking of the youth of myself, and when I was a younger child, I did try and touch things in the house and reach out to them and feel them to see what they were like, and thus I thought,
bang my body off against them in order to defeat them. Yeah,
exactly. And then I thought that this idea would be great, where I was this character who was like a child, and such like a child he would reach out with his hands and touch the world and learn about it for the first time, which like in practice in the game makes no sense whatsoever, because it's just like this intergalactic thing where this star is going around these random levels and like killing enemies by grabbing them and then, as you said, head bashing them into non-existence. So yeah, it's an interesting game overall. I guess just to set up what Ristar is, because we haven't really talked about what the game is yet. It is a 2D side-scrolling platformer, and I think it very much has a lot in common with Sonic the Hedgehog, but simultaneously is like the opposite of Sonic the Hedgehog. And so what I mean by that is a lot of the kind of framing around the game. Like, you start the first level and it says stage 1, and it's like, you look at that side by side with the start of Sonic or even Sonic 2, and you see the way that like the elements of the foreground, like the kind of framing of the level coming in is exactly the same. Like, it feels so much from the same handbook that they were just, pulling exactly from what Sonic was doing. And so this studio is actually a new studio. A lot of people attribute this game to Sonic Team, but it actually was a different studio within Sega. But I think a lot of people kind of got confused because of those elements. Another element, I think, is every stage that you go through has 2 parts of it and then a boss level, which is very much like Sonic's Act 1. It's like 2-1, 2-2, then a boss, right? And even the Sonic games later into the life cycle of that character, even on GBA when we were playing Sonic Advance, Sonic still has always had that 2-1, 2-2, and you fight bosses. And sometimes the boss is like a separate level, sometimes the boss is just at the end of the second level. But yeah, it's doing that playbook essentially of how things work. But Ristar himself is very different as a character. He's slow, he's plodding, he's not fast in any way, and it's, even though the level design again is very similar to Sonic with its kind of multiple approaches, like different routes you can take, you don't have to take one route to get to the end, it feels actually like the level design is more suited to this type of play because it's more exploration focused, more slower paced. And so I've always thought that Sonic's level design is cool, but like so much of it you just go past and you don't even notice because Sonic is about speed and just like getting through the space, that like this feels almost like a better suited character to this type of level design. So I guess we'll just start with, what are your thoughts generally on the game, Bally? You just finished it today, so did I. Actually, I finished it about 1 a.m. yesterday before I went to sleep. But yeah, you played through it. How do you think the game is overall?
Yeah, I think it really does feel like it was a Sonic game. It feels like a game that was made for a character that was in the Sonic family, but then they changed the character at the last minute from, like, I don't know, Tails. Imagine like his 2 tails grabbing things or something, or something, and then they just changed it at the last minute to this character, Ristar. I think there's quite a few aspects that have aged quite badly, and we can get to those. But I think generally, like, it's got some jank in there because it's an old game. But generally, like, it's colorful. The music's great. There's some really creative levels, some really creative and interesting boss fights, and that's kind of as much as you can hope for with a good 2D platformer, to be honest. And I think the fundamental mechanic of like grabbing things, sometimes technically, I think it feels. It could feel better. I mean, I think it probably felt amazing for the time, but these days it kind of feels a little bit jank in parts. That's maybe a harsh word, but like...
Right, I mean, things like swinging on an enemy. There are times when you're holding on to an enemy and you're swinging back and forth, and getting the correct momentum to like jump out of that with momentum to go upwards often is impossible. Like, it feels like I could never pull it off, and so I would just like never be able to get up to where I should have been with those types of things, and have to like use another way up there, or just not attempt to do it that way, because something about the physics didn't like when I let go of the character.
Right. And there's a couple of levels where I kind of reached near the end of the game where I reached like pseudo dead ends, where I was like, wait, the only way I can get through this is I do like this jump through this area, and then I have to land on this spike to then do it again. And I kind of just ended up messing myself up the wall, like glitching it myself up the wall on the right, and then kind of just took the hits. But because I had full health, I just took the hits and then continued on with that. It just felt like I completely misread how that level was meant to be beaten or whatever. And there was maybe like 2 moments like that, and that's never a nice feeling to find in the game, but generally, like, it's pretty cool, and like it's nice to play a 2D platformer with a brand new character, but also from a familiar company like Sega. Like, I think overall it's a pretty good game, all things considered.
Yeah, I generally agree, and I think that there's part of what is really cool about it is I think it has great animation. Like, it's a really beautiful game, and in terms of the character and some of the, like, specifically when you're on ice and you're sliding and the way the character model like turns around and twists, like, it feels like there's a really nice amount of frames of animation going on there, but also there's little kind of touches where if you're standing in place, like, this is another Sonic comparison of, like, when you're standing in place playing Sonic, he'll start, like, tapping his foot on the floor and just like wagging at the screen and stuff, and Ristar just kind of starts dancing and, like, puts his hand in the air, but it's a similar thing. And what I didn't notice, and I kind of realized, was if you are standing still on different stages, he will do different animations depending where he is.
Wow.
So, for example, in the snow level, if you stand still there, he'll just sit on the ground and make a little snowman. And it's like, it's a really cool little polish touches like that I think make it stand out a little bit more, right? And feel like a lot of care was put into it. So yeah, let's maybe talk about the core mechanic, because I think that's one of the most interesting things is his stretchy arms. So, like, to interact with a lot of the stuff in the game, there's your arm, basically it's a very simple game. There's two buttons essentially. There's jump and there's use your arms, and that's pretty much it. Like, move left and right, jump, and throw your arms out. And I think they get a lot of mileage out of this idea, not only because of things we mentioned, like hanging on to enemies that, like, are flying that will, like, carry you across a gap, but other stuff like pinging yourself up the side of walls. There's a way in which you can kind of attached to, because you can kind of pull yourself towards any surface, but then Ristar will kind of bounce off of it, but you can chain that stuff together, and you can actually go up vertical walls just by angling your arms at the right.
It doesn't really feel right, because they have it works, I agree, and I'd used it quite a lot, but because they have like actual hooks in the game that are clearly like meant to be used like a ladder for Ristar to climb up, but even if you can kind of just go up a flat wall using that kind of almost like, you kind of like futzing it, just kind of like, you're not meant to do it, but it kind of works.
It feels wrong, doesn't it? But then you get to the end of the game and it feels like you have to use it to get through that last level, right? So, like, it feels like one of those mechanics that you slowly get used to over the course of the game, and by the end you're like, oh wait, I should have been doing this the whole time. And in fact, if you go back to earlier levels, I'm sure there are parts that you can get to just by doing that early on, by just like constantly pinging yourself at the side of a vertical wall to get up to a space. And I guess, yeah, part of that is allowed because you have 8 directional movement with the stretchy arms, right? So you can do it obviously in the 4 cardinal directions, but then also every diagonal as well. And so that, I think that part you were talking about earlier on, where there are spikes, there's like 4 or 5 levels of spikes where you swing on a pole upwards, and then if you don't get your kind of bounces off the wall quick enough, you'll just land on the spikes.
Yeah,
that was one where it took me a
wrong.
while to understand it, but like, you have to like swing up, bounce on the wall diagonally, then get to the next one. It's basically giving you enough momentum to get up to the next one, because you can't directly do it straight away.
Tight window, yeah.
Tight windows, yeah, for sure. But yeah, and you use it, it's interesting because like, you pull enemies towards you and then they just bounce away aside the screen, just go all over the place. One of the weird things I thought was every enemy you destroy turns into this just kind of black ball with eyes, right? Like every character is like that.
Even bosses.
And yeah, even bosses. And the thing I was always thinking about is like, Ristar himself kind of, he's just a black ball with this star pasted on front of him. Like, his character design is literally like a black ball with arms and legs, and he's got gloves on or whatever, but it feels like,
for a game that has so much like detailed animations and detailed enemies and bosses, the actual design of Ristar is very strange and a little bit lacking in a way. It is really weird.
You would think that if you're going to make this star character, his whole body would be a star or something like that. And yet he is this rounded shape, almost like a paper mache star, like put on front of him. I think it looks good, to be fair. Like, I think the actual character model does look nice. But when you step back and think about it, and then you're like, well, what are the lore implications here? Like, is this like their skin or like their skeleton? Is the skeleton of every creature in this game this black ball? And so Ristar is really just like a skeleton with like a skin pasted over him in the wrong way. Like, you can start to get real fucked up about it, and it gets super weird. But I just found that curious that like every enemy you destroy turns into that black ball, but also that's what Ristar is from the very beginning, and it's weird. I guess it works in terms of like those animations where he's turning around, I guess the kind of the circular nature of him makes the kind of 3D effect almost of his character model turning a bit more impactful. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, I think this game has a lot of cool locations you go to, and it's on the scale of like galactic kind of planets and stuff like that. You're often going to levels don't have a through line, I would say. So like level 1-1 to level 1-2, they could both be set in totally different spaces, and there doesn't have to be a connection necessarily between them. Sometimes you'll be like on a music level where you're just bouncing on like pianos and stuff like that, and then you'll go into something completely different that is unrelated. And I think that's probably characteristic of the time, I want to say, of level design not being as specifically contextual, right? Like, we think about the most contextual platformer of all time, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which is like beautiful when it comes to that stuff, you know, like the entire idea of a world, the entire idea of a idea being developed, everything being contextually relevant to the space you're in, like the entire like factory section that's always the best one to go back to, of like the jellies and stuff, and then turning into like ice pops and all of that stuff, as crazy and out there as it gets, all fits within like the design that they are taking you through. Whereas I think games back then were much more like, hey man, you want to make a snow level? Yeah, that sounds good. Let's make one of those. What should come after it?
Here's this random mechanic we've not been building up to at all, where you pick up a snowball and throw it at the snowman, and it's like the only time in the game that you're using like a separate button to suddenly start rolling snowball. I was like, because I was stopped there, like, okay, but how? Clearly the game wants me to throw snowballs at this guy, but the game hasn't really taught me how to make snowballs. So I'm going to try pressing buttons. Oh, this button works. I think it's like the Y button or something, the top one on the Switch. And I'm rolling a snowball, and now I'm firing at them. Because there's no build like a Tropical Freeze, there are multiple moments in the game where you're a bit mechanically flummoxed almost, and you're kind of like, I don't really understand what's going on, and I don't even know what this world I'm in is. And it's just it kind of like rocks you a bit, like you're kind of not certain in what you're meant to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really funny. I never figured that out. I didn't.
So how did you beat the snowman? It's like a mini boss.
Yeah, so basically what I did was I took the snowball, threw it at him, and then just dodged him for a while, and a new snowball appeared after a few seconds, basically. So one would just appear behind me, and I was like, okay, I guess one just keeps appearing then. So I basically just went through dodging his balls, and then
press Y and Ristar would bend down and start rolling one quickly, and then pick it up.
That's actually kind of cool. I wish I had figured that out, but obviously, as you said, like there's nothing telling you that that's what you can do. So that's kind of crazy that you.
I bet there's other moments in the game similar to that we might have missed or something, because it just feels so strange that that's like this one-off thing. I don't know.
That is really weird. Yeah, I had no idea that was something that you could do.
Because there is a bit of throwing, like in one of the later boss fights, and there's one level, like the music level, where you're throwing that music metronome thing about, and there's a little bit of throwing in the game, but just enough where it's a bit weird, but not so much where you can argue it's a constant mechanic because it's so seldom.
Yeah, I think like there is other one-off stuff like that. I want to bring in a comment from Capsule J and just go through some of the pros that he had on the game. He says, I only ended up having time to play the first few levels, but here are my impressions. This definitely looks and feels like a Sonic Team game, but with some unique hooks that make it distinct from the Blue Hedgehog's adventures. The graphics look great, so colourful and detailed. Being a 1995 release, it really shows that developers had mastered pushing the Mega Drive hardware to the limit. The 8-directional grabbing mechanic is very interesting. I like how it allows you to climb on a variety of surfaces as well. Multi-directional movement like that is unusual in a 16-bit game. And then he says there are some cool environmental interactions in the first few levels. For example, you can bash down a tree to make a bridge for yourself. This was done more than 20 years before Breath of the Wild. Take that, Nintendo. Sega does what Nintendo don't. And that was one of the early ones. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Like you're hitting this tree and it kind of knocks over and makes a bridge.
And it never really comes back, it feels like. It's like a one-off thing that you just kind of roll with it.
Yeah, totally. And I do like that idea as well of being able to the whole directional angle of like pinging yourself up a wall almost reminds me of how people in Super Metroid figured out how to like single wall jump, where like if you take your momentum in the correct way, you don't need to bounce between walls in Super Metroid to get up a space. You can just go up one single wall, which eventually in later platformers became very common. You know, stuff like Super Meat Boy, it's a core mechanic of the game that you just jump up one wall.
And that's where this game, it feels like, so Super Metroid, it's like a bonus thing you can do.
Yes.
Whereas this game, that area we were just discussing with the layers of spikes, I don't know how you were meant to do it without doing that trick we did.
So I think there's a way to do it if you have full health by just taking the hit, basically.
Yeah, that's what I assumed, and it's stuff like that bugs me, but you know, it's weird.
It's an old game, man, right? Like they were just figuring this stuff out, and it makes a lot of sense. I guess like what did you like the variety of spaces that we went through, as weird and as disconnected as they were?
It's solid. I think it actually is zany enough, and because it's the whole like planets thing, and you're going from one planet to another. Like apparently, I just read the plot on Wikipedia, and like the main villain of the game, I've forgotten his name already. Like, but he basically
he's a wizard guy, right?
Yeah, he gains control of like the rulers of each planet, and those are actually the bosses. So all the bosses you fight are like the rulers of the planet, so that makes them fit a little bit more thematically into the area in. So I think there is a little more of a through line than perhaps we were suggesting earlier, but it's very tangential, and I think that the levels generally do really pop, and there's enough variety there where for like, I don't know, 2-3 hour game, it's a solid variety, and it's what you would want with this kind of game.
I was actually really surprised that the second level was an underwater level straight away. Like you're just straight in there, and
the underwater levels don't feel half bad. The swimming's okay.
They feel pretty good. Like there is and I actually ended up switching between analog stick and D-pad a lot more than I thought I would. And I think part of that is because it's easier underwater to navigate, I find anyway, with an analog stick. Even in a game like Donkey Kong, where usually I'm on D-pad, whenever I went into the underwater sections of Tropical Freeze, I would instantly switch over to the analog stick instead, just because you have free movement and it's a lot easier. Though, did you notice this later on? There's like part of the level, like one of the last levels, where you're just kind of swimming through the air for some reason.
What is that level about? We need to discuss that level. Like there was, so you're randomly going from like on land physics to underwater physics. Yeah. And there's no visual indication like to like delineate the two types of physics at all, and you randomly swap between the two, and that blew my mind. I was like, what is this game? This is ridiculous. I was kind of unhappy about it, to be honest, because it's also not the easiest level. Like there's some jank parts and dead ends, and you're like, what am I meant to be doing here, and why am I swimming? Like, this is ridiculous.
I do think the last like couple of levels, the last planet as it were, is definitely a big step up in difficulty, because I think up to then generally the game is not like easy, but like it's relatively, for this type of game from this era, relatively easy to get through. Like it gives you come across chests often enough that give you extra stars if you want to heal yourself, and then you'll come across ones with a blue star which gives you full health, which is great. So yeah, up to that point I was like, yeah, you know, I've been rewinding a bunch, but that's just because, you know, I don't want to waste too much time and redo levels and stuff like that. But I was like, yeah, I probably could get through this without using save states, and then I got to that last part and I was like, oh nope, actually they could not do that.
I'd also argue, we can talk about difficulty in a bit, but like I do think the bosses are a massive step up in difficulty, especially some of the later ones. I was just going to say my favorite level in the whole game was actually, I think it's like the last level before the final boss.
It's the one where you're putting crystals into slots and going around that
level, where it's like this golden maze, and each room is like this new kind of weird puzzle, and sometimes it's just beat all the enemies in the room to get the crystal. Sometimes you have to like peel back the
that was a really cool thing, the background like metallic stuff. That I was in that room for a little while. I'm like, what am I supposed to do here?
I had to look that one up, and then I was like,
oh really? Okay.
Yeah, I was like, when I saw the reveal, I was like, this game is so bizarre sometimes.
Yeah, it's super weird.
The way it mixes up, like there's another one where you do the swinging around the pole to ping Ristar like through spiky areas, and I loved all that. I thought the way that that level just kind of made you like, here's a simple goal. You have to achieve the goal to get the crystal to move on. It's just like kind of like gauntlet after gauntlet after gauntlet. I thought was a very nice way to finish the game.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was a unique, like, different approach. Almost gave me a bit of Mega Man vibes, like those levels at the end of Mega Man where you have to go and fight every boss by going into teleporters. But in this case, it was, okay, here are different challenge rooms in order to figure things out. And I guess maybe let's talk about that whole pole swinging mechanic, because...
Yeah, what do they call it? Yeah, pole vault? Pole swing?
Yeah, almost. It's just I guess it's a way in which the game allows this interesting idea of the star and the shooting star, because at the end of every level you see Ristar just shooting through the sky, just like at super speed, almost like a Super Saiyan basically. And that's another similarity to Sonic, is like, you know, Super Sonic is yellow and just like bursts through the sky almost like a blazing star.
Yeah.
And ironically, this is one of those things that reminded me of a different franchise, a Nintendo franchise, reminded me of Kirby a lot, because a lot of Kirby games have this thing. Canvas Curse does it with a big ramp at the end of levels. I think earlier Kirby games do it where you're on this big trampoline and you have to hit the button at the right time to bounce up high to get as much height as possible. But like the end of level poles are very much that. You get bonus points depending on how high you are in the sky before you leave the side of the screen. Yeah, that as well. Yeah, totally. So it's almost like a final little challenge at the end of a level. And I always was very tense when I was holding the kind of swing pole, because you get up to max speed. I'm like, man, timing when I leave this is really, really hard. It's like I was kind of like, okay, go, and then it would just ping off, and I'd be like, oh, okay, can I make it? And obviously, you know, you can rewind and stuff if you mess up. But I enjoyed that stuff. I also liked that the bonus levels, another very similar thing to Sonic, where you find random bonus levels. No Chaos Emeralds here, unfortunately, but you do get like random objects. The bonus levels are ones that you can find in far out places that are also dictated by the pole. So you find a pole, and the pole will take you to a bonus stage. Did you find any of the bonus stages as you went through?
Yeah, I found one in the ice area, and it like took me to a very difficult ice area that I struggled immensely on and just timed out and moved on with the game. But yeah,
totally. Those are real challenges, those areas. And there's definitely, I think, the final level, I found one where I was like, I don't even know what to do here. Like, I have no idea how to get higher up. Like, I couldn't jump high enough. It was there's definitely some secret stuff going on there that is a little bit tricky and didn't quite get a grasp on. But generally, I like the idea of the swinging pole, and I preferred it in the later stages, I think, especially that last part we talked about, because it allows you to experiment with it a bit more. The other nice thing about it is, like, Ristar is invincible when that happens, and so you can bump into spikes a bunch and you won't take damage. You'll just ping off of them and bounce around the space, and so it's good for exploring like areas that are maybe a bit more dangerous, it's also good for like maybe skipping parts of stages and things like that. So I wish there were a few more of those used, and I actually would have liked it if there was a bit more variety in terms of the gameplay. One of my biggest disappointments of this game was the snow level opens with this really cool intro of Ristar skiing down a hill. I'm like, oh hell yeah, let's do some skiing stuff. Let's like dodge out of the way of enemies and jump over things, and then you just start the level, and it's a nice level, and you got, you know, physics where you spin around, but there wasn't any kind of additional mechanics going on.
In its defense, I actually really liked the ice mechanic, and what I mean by that is normally 2D platformers, the ice level, like Mario or whatever, it's like, oh, now Mario's like slipping on ice physics and you can barely control him. Whereas this game, it's like, right, you're on the ice, you can't actually stop, you just have to control. It becomes like a one-button game where you're just jumping at the right moment. And I think that's a very good mechanical use of ice, rather than just, let's just make the same physics but make them slippy.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, the green ice, or at least the green stuff that's slidey in the later levels, where there's one part where you're sliding up a space, and you have...
That's really cool. I like that.
Little ramps that kind of mean that you don't go over the edge, and they kind of give you a little bit of momentum to get back. I thought that was definitely interesting for sure, and it helped for making the game a little bit different, and adding a little bit of uniqueness to it. How did you find the bosses? I think this is definitely an interesting point of the game. There are a lot of different ones, a lot of weird ones. I think the variety is actually pretty great, and I do appreciate that they're all unique and they all feel like they have slightly different mechanics tied to them. Were there any bosses that stood out to you, any ones that you enjoyed more than others? There were certainly ones I found tricky and
Yeah.
difficult timing wise. I think the big goop guy who do you feed him pizza? I'm not sure what you're feeding him, but like that someone brings along a little dish and you have to throw it into his mouth.
That's quite a hard fight. Yeah,
The timing window on him opening his mouth, he sometimes freezes you. It's hard to like get out of the way
Yeah.
of some of that stuff. That one was just bizarre in a fun way, but I like the idea of you kill him by overfeeding him and then he just kind of just dies. Is a cool one. Any that stood out to you?
I like the one where you're almost like falling through a mine in the middle of it, and I can't remember what it was. Was it like some sort of?
It's a mole. It's like a big mole guy.
Yeah, I think I maybe enjoyed that one the most. Can we talk about the final boss?
Yeah, go for it.
I think the final boss is pretty damn difficult.
It's super hard.
And did you notice that this boss just has a move that takes you to the start of the boss fight again?
It's the black hole, isn't it? So
what the hell is up with that? Like,
it's an
I mean,
insta-death.
obviously I'm using rewind and fuck that shit, but like I'm like I am just like flabbergasted. Like there's a move.
I do think there is a steep incline at the end of the game, right? Like not only those last kind of couple levels, but also the final boss stuff is just goes a bit too far, and I think that is just a relic of the time, right? Like,
okay, yeah.
You wanted people obviously to not finish the game super quickly, and this is a short game, it only takes a couple of hours, right? So I think the idea there being that, you know, by the end of the game, sure, you might have got through these other bosses, but they just want to make it hard as possible, and it's all about learning the pattern and making sure you don't get sucked up.
One common complaint I have about the bosses is I don't think they have very good feedback on when your moves are doing damage or not.
100%.
Other than the fact, the only thing that they progress is like the bosses change color as they take more damage. But other than that, it's like, am I doing the right thing? How on earth do I dodge this? And you know, like,
so here's an interesting point actually, because this was something I didn't realize again until I researched the game. When you have held on to an enemy and you have pinged away from them and you just keep pinging, if you're in that state of having pinged, you are invincible. So there are bosses, and this certainly happened at the end of the game for like, I think there's the claw machine
the
boss.
last boss.
The big brute guy, and there's a claw machine in the way. I was just like pinging non-stop on him, and none of his moves were hitting me, and I was like, what's going on here? Is this just glitching out or something?
Yeah.
And I think it is an animation thing where you have a bit of an invincibility window once you have like grabbed and thrown somebody, which means if you keep chaining that together, you can kind of take no damage, or at least like be much less likely to take damage.
Well, I was almost doing like treating that boss almost like a Mega Man boss, where it's a race against time of your health will go down faster than my health, because that combination of the invincibility frames you get when you drop a single bit of health, and also like you said, the invincibility frames you get when you're doing your grabbing move. If you combine the two together, it's just like, can I outlast you? And that's kind of how I defeated that boss.
Yeah, just kill it as quickly as possible, basically.
With save states helping me, of course, and rewind. And I was rewinding a ton. I think this game generally is actually quite difficult. And
I definitely did a lot more at the end of the game. There was some points, like you mentioned, there are points of no return in that last level where I was like, well, I'm just going to die here, and I'm just going to go back to the checkpoint and make a new save there, because I can't get back out of this situation. I've fucked myself too much, right? Like, in that definitely is a bit, cause of a little consternation, but it wasn't too bad.
There's a good number of areas of the game where it's like, I don't know how to get past this part without just taking a bit of damage and then moving on. And that happened an annoying number of times later in the game.
Yeah. Did you, with the claw machine boss, ever get to the side of the claw and then hit it, and then the claw machine does damage to the boss? It like goes down onto the boss and does damage to him.
I thought you had to do that. Yeah.
You can do that for damage, but you can also just ping him the whole way, which is also an option.
Oh, okay. Right.
If you just attack him, as you said, it's hard to know if you've done any damage, because there is no response. There's no kind of flashing stuff happening, which means it's just difficult to know if stuff's going on.
I think there's like a minor flash, but it's really just not major enough. It's combined with like the sound design. Modern games of this type, although how many 2D platformers are there in the same ilk these days? But my point is, like, when we do see them, it's very clear. It makes like a big noise. Or you think about like being in a ball and jumping off Eggman, even in Sonic, it makes like a really clear. He like flashes white, and then and you get like this really loud like grrr kind of sound. And like, I just needed more like feedback for that.
Yeah, for sure. We had a comment from Timeless Gaming UK who talked a bit about the bosses and said the boss fights were really characterful, creative, and fun to figure out, and rarely frustrating. In fact, overall, I found the difficulty just about perfect, at least until the last stage, which had me reaching for the rewind feature quite often. Which, yeah, I think that kind of mirrors a lot of what we're saying.
Yeah,
Though I think there's definitely some bosses that even earlier on could be a little tricky. The bird one was a weird one, where there's the one bird who attacks you, and there's the one who starts singing on the platform. That was strange.
Yeah, and you basically like knock him off the platform. That was weird.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, very creative, like all really well designed stuff. And I think for 1995, pretty damn cool actually.
Yeah, I probably agree with you on the mole fight. I think that was also my favorite because you kind of are falling through the different stages, so you do enough damage to him to where he falls down.
Yeah.
And the thing I really like about that one is at the very end, he kind of breaks open and all the pieces fall apart, and inside is just a tiny little mole guy who like tries to attack you with like a peeny little attack that like flows along the ground. You jump over it.
That kind of characterization actually feels quite Shovel Knight in a way, like that whole fight, like the falling through the thing and everything. It felt very unlike 1995. Not that I've played a ton of games from 1995, but
no, yeah, totally. But I mean, of course, Shovel Knight is pulling from games like this, right?
Sure.
So could have been that way. But that, and then the mole at the end, you like hit him once and he dies, but he just sits there in the corner crying. And I felt sorry for that little baby mole at the end of that fight. I did like the underwater fight with the hammerhead shark. That was actually a fun one because you had to like ping him into the stoppers. Basically, there's a water level, and the water kind of reduces as you take these stoppers out of the ground. The stoppers that are kind of holding back the water, and once all of them are gone, he basically has no water to live in anymore, and so he's just like, I'm done, I can't move, and he's just kind of flopping around on the ground. So that was a good one. I think the first boss is just really weird. It's just this kind of wizard guy who has a ball with him, and you hit the ball, and then the ball dies, and then you just like attack the wizard a bunch, and he's just kind of floating above you. Doesn't
strange.
make a lot of sense. But yeah, I think the particular problem with the last boss for me is he has that electric lightning move.
I didn't have a way of dodging. I had no idea how to dodge that.
Yeah, I watched a playthrough, or I watched a video of like all Ristar bosses no damage, and I was like, okay, let's watch some guy do this and take no damage. And what they do is they dodge to the. So this is how I found out to dodge it, but he kept doing the same move like 5 times in a row. I would like dodge to the left of him to jump out the way of the lightning, but then he would immediately appear again, and I'd dodge again, and he just kept doing it. And I thought there was a way for me to break out of it by just dodging it, but it seems like he persistently did it, and the only way to get out of it is to jump to the left and then grab him straight away immediately with a diagonal to the right, and then you can knock him out of it. But it's really hard and a tight timing window to pull off, and I never managed it. Same to you. Like I always got hit by the fucking lightning move, and it was really hard. It was very hard to get out of the way of. So yeah, it was pretty tragic, that especially. One of the things I do like about the way that they use your lives, or at least your health, is when you do die, the final star will just shoot at you and just knock you out. Like your last health is like, oh, fuck you, and just throws itself at you, and that's what kills you. And I was like, that's a pretty fun like way of taking the UI and like building it into the game a little bit. I thought that was a neat little touch that the game did that I found pretty fun. And I think there's a lot of problems with this game generally. Capsule J had a few things to comment on and said, just like a Sonic game, Ristar likes to blind drop you into spikes or hit you with surprise enemies. I don't have the patience for that nonsense in 2021, so I made liberal use of the Mega Drive Collection's rewind feature. Said the levels have a variety of paths you can take, but I never quite felt like I'm going the quote right way. And then also said finishing a level by flinging yourself off the edge of the screen feels unceremonious compared to other mascot platformers. Overall, this was an interesting game to try. I'll probably play through the rest of it next time in the mood for a light and breezy 2D platformer. I'm curious about what you think, Bally, of the levels having a variety of paths, but you never felt like you were going the right way. Because I always felt that wherever I was going, I kind of was making progress, and I didn't feel like I ever got lost necessarily. There were, as we said, there's some paths that kind of lead to a bit of dead ends, but I always felt like whatever path I was on, I was going to get to the end by the end of it.
I agree until maybe like the last couple of worlds, probably. Like I agree that most of the game, the game vaguely guides you, and you kind of okay, I'll go here, and then I never really got lost, and then there were just some very frustrating not necessarily forks in the road, but just kind of like dead ends and things, like I was saying, in some of those latter levels that were just a bit frustrating and a bit of a sour taste in your mouth. When I think the early game just feels a lot more well-rounded.
Yeah, for sure. And just like a lot of variety and a lot of different kind of levels and ideas being thrown around. What do you think of the music with this game? How do you feel that held up?
I mean, I think it's pretty damn good, actually. Like, it was popping, and I can't say much more than that. I just really liked it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's like one of those that will stick in my head as like super memorable necessarily, but I did like what I heard of it, and I think I think the Genesis generally had a pretty good sound chip, so a lot of the music on that system was generally quite good, and a lot of people seem to hold it in quite high regard, which certainly works. But yeah, do you have any kind of like overall thoughts? Is this a game you would have picked up had this not been a Backlog Club, Bally? Is it something that you would have eventually thought like, yeah, I'll try that thing out? And how do you feel having played it?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can say I would. I know that you're the big one on the podcast when it comes to. I'm just going to jump into this very old, probably quite jank game, but I'm going to enjoy it anyway.
I played Strider this evening, literally right before we started recording. I finished all of Strider, went through all of that today. And that game, I should bring this up because that was one of our choices. I'll maybe talk about it next time on the show. I'm glad we didn't do that game because I think that game's pretty bad, honestly. I think it was rough in a lot of ways, very fucking hard, like almost in a way of, because the thing with Ristar that I think was actually really nice about it is I don't think it was brutally punishingly difficult for most of it, and for the most part I was just playing through the level normally, and I'd be like, oh, I got hit, I'll just rewind to undo that hit, that type of thing. Whereas in Strider I felt like 90% of me playing it was rewinding it, and that's not good, right? Like, it's just not enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, that's where... Yeah, I mean, I'd have like very little to no interest now in playing Strider for sure, but
yeah, don't play it, it's bad.
I think I felt like all the frustrations I was feeling with this game would make me stop and think, why am I playing this game? I can play something a bit more modern.
You can spend more your time on something else.
Yeah, and that's how I feel most of the time.
And I think for me, I'm okay with it because generally these games are really short, and I like knocking something out, right? Like, you're
setting the world record for most games beaten in a year.
I'm trying.
We all know.
I'm getting there. But like, I also like just want to know. I want to be able to like not to have an opinion on everything, but like someone brings up Strider and I'm like, well, I know what that is now, right? And I've played through it and I have a thought about it, and I can talk to it.
I have that urge a lot more for games in the sort of 2000s to 2010, more so than I have for like 1990 to 2000. And
yeah, that makes sense.
So stuff like Halo. I played loads of Halo this year and have had a blast. So it's just kind of like, I'm almost more tolerant to that kind of thing, and my curiosity of I really want to know what those games are about is better for that era than perhaps that 90s era, where I think my tolerance for some of the weaker aspects is a little lower than yours.
Yeah. That totally makes sense, and especially for the big games like that. But when it comes to, I don't know, I definitely think that because games got longer and longer over the generations, and you talk about going back to like PS2 games, like think about going to, I don't know, some kind of generic PS2 platformer, it's probably still going to be like 8 to 10 hours long. And to me, that sounds like a waste of time. Whereas like, okay, Strider might be not very good, in fact, probably a bad game, but it's like 45 minutes to an hour of my life, and that's like nothing in the grand scheme of things. So for me, I think the reason I'm liking diving into this Genesis stuff is because everything is super short. So if it is not great, it's just over and done with, and you're out of there, right? That's and Ristar, comes in at a couple of hours, and I played it over a week or so, didn't like do it all at once, and I think that was kind of better for it because it made me remember some parts more and helped me kind of like soak it in a little bit. So yeah, enjoyed it quite a bit. I guess I'm just going to close with Timeless Gaming UK's thoughts, because he gave us quite a few things that we hadn't. Obviously, we touched on a lot of them, so I just wanted to bring them back at the end here. It says, I was one of the few kids in my school who had a Super Nintendo rather than a Mega Drive. I was an avid reader of Nintendo mags, and as a result was indoctrinated to think of the Sega machine as, quote, the enemy. As such, pretty much the entire console's library has evaded me. Recently, however, I picked up the Mega Drive Classics collection for my Switch and have since been checking out what I missed. I was really glad when Ristar came up on the Backlog Club, as it was one I was eager to check out. Straight away, I warmed to the game as it has really charming art style and catchy music. The graphics are really impressive for a 16-bit game too, with gorgeous scrolling backgrounds and lots of detail, especially in some later stages. It didn't surprise me to learn that it was a late release for the system, coming out in 1995. The overlay at the beginning of each stage seems lifted straight from Sonic, as I mentioned, so I assume it must share some DNA with those games. I've always struggled to enjoy the fast pace of Sonic, but thankfully Ristar is much slower and easier to control. The game's unique grab mechanic meant that slow and deliberate platforming was required, and that suits my taste to a T. As the game progressed, I found myself continuously impressed by the creative uses of the grab mechanic and of the varied environments and enemies. The game certainly felt a little too short, but at the same time it stayed fresh throughout and didn't outstay its welcome. Compared to a game like Donkey Kong Country, however, which came out a year before and shares many of its pros but offers a much grander adventure, I think I would have felt a bit shortchanged by it at the time. Nevertheless, I had a great time with it while it lasted and can certainly see myself playing through it again sometime. And yeah, it's interesting to bring up Donkey Kong Country as a comparison because that obviously came out earlier, and I think as a game it probably holds up a lot better than Ristar generally. It's a really well made thing that I enjoyed a huge amount.
It's an even more limited move set, I guess, in Ristar. Ristar is like that eight-way directional grabbing mechanic is kind of in a way beyond its time, and it's also part of what, in a sense, I would argue holds it back a bit, because I don't think that mechanic always felt quite as clean and crisp as it obviously would in a modern game. It
wasn't as fully developed as it needed to be, right? Like, it's almost, they were trying something and it was a cool, unique idea, and I never knew about it. Like, when I saw Ristar, I was like, it's probably just another mascot platformer where you jump. But I think the thing I really liked about it was that I didn't expect it to be like that. Like, I didn't expect it to have this unique arms mechanic that honestly I've not seen in anything else, right? Unless you're talking about Nintendo's fighting game ARMS, in which obviously that's kind of the idea behind that. But in a platformer like this, yeah, you're right. It feels like it was a bit too early, in that the idea was there, but the execution wasn't quite there, right?
Yeah, totally. Is it also interesting what Timeless Gaming UK is saying about like how they had the Super Nintendo, but everyone else had the Mega Drive, I guess, in the UK, and my impression was that the Mega Drive was quite a bit bigger than Super Nintendo in the UK.
Yes.
Or am I making that up?
No, you're correct. Yeah,
Right.
Sega was much more popular over here than Nintendo was, and that kind of carried over after Sega left the console business to Sony, and so Sega were the big guys here, and then Sony became the big
Greg
guys
Millers
here.
of this world.
Yeah, so Sony kind of really dominated Europe from that point, and Nintendo in the UK have never been the top dog, right? Like, even from the beginning, Nintendo have always been second fiddle to either Sega or Sony, and it's interesting, and I'm not sure quite why. I guess a part of it kind of comes out of the computer era of the UK, and like a lot of people playing games on Ataris and Amigas and that type of thing, and I guess the Mega Drive just appealed to that audience a bit more for whatever reason. I'm not sure quite what the reason was, but yeah, it just ended up either they did better marketing or something, but just seemed to taste-wise work a lot better for this audience in the UK. And so yeah, it's very rare for people to be big Nintendo fans over here, as we know, because there aren't many. So it's yeah, definitely really interesting. So cool. Yeah, so I'm glad we did this. Final thoughts on Ristar. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think it's really unique and interesting. Yeah, I'm glad I played it. I think I would have played it anyway, just because, as I mentioned, I'm kind of going through all of these Genesis games and trying to just figure out which ones are unique and interesting. And yeah, I think it's definitely good to have in my brain pocket now, of like, whenever someone brings up Ristar, I'll be like, oh, I know that game. That was pretty cool. So there you go. It's Ristar. Sweet. Well, that, Bally, is going to close out the show for today. Thank you, everybody, for listening and for joining us on this episode. A little unconventional as it is. We're going to get into some more conventional stuff, though, at the end of the year with our regular end-of-year podcast. So, Bally, do you want to tell the fine folks at home what our plans are for a Game of the Year?
Well, here we go. We've got 3 special shows. So if you're new to the show and you're unaware of what does this Nintendo Life do for Game of the Year, well, this is what we do. This year we will have our episode 210, and it's going to come out on Monday, the 6th of December. And that will be our individual lists of top 10 games of the year that didn't come out in 2021. So this is a personal list where we've played a ton of games that didn't come out in 2021 that we want to list and talk about. And that's going to be cross-platform. We then have our non-Tendo list. So this will be this NintendoLife, and that's going to be a Patreon show that comes out on Monday, the 13th of December, which is MBZ's birthday. I might also add. And that's going to be a joint top 5 non-Tendo games of the year. And maybe top 5, maybe top 10. We can discuss that later.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. Yeah.
But yeah, it's important that that's non-Nintendo. So anything that came out in 2021 that wasn't on a Nintendo platform that we played. So that will come out on Monday, the 13th of December for all patrons. And that's available for $1 if you're interested in that show. And then we have the big one. It's episode 211, and that's coming out on Monday, the 20th of December. And that is going to be a joint joint list, top 10 games of 2021 that came out on Nintendo systems. We have played a ton this year, so I think that's going to be quite the discussion. And like I said, that's a joint list, top 10 Nintendo games. So yeah, you don't want to miss those 3 episodes is what I'm saying. It's going to be a packed December.
Absolutely, yeah. Looking forward to it. Always fun this time of year, just writing your lists and figuring out what to put in different places. And I tweeted earlier today, but it's fucking impossible. This is one of the problems of playing 70 games in a year, is that you have to make a list of 10, and I can't do that. It hurts my soul, and I hate it. It's the worst. This is why I should play less video games, so that I have less to actually list at the end of the year.
We should mention we're also going to do personal top 10 videos as well.
Yeah.
And MBZ, you're going to put those out as a podcast as well.
Yeah, last year we put those up as podcast episodes as well, so I might do that again. It might be a fun thing, so that you can listen to it.
That's like 5 different things to go through. So we got the non-Nintendo list, we got top 10 games of the year that didn't come out this year, we got the top 10 Nintendo games of the year, we got MBZ's top 10 games of the year, and we got Bally's top 10 games of the year. So that's 5 different lists to look forward to.
Hey, what can we say? We like lists. They're fun times.
Love them.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So sweet. All right. Well, let's close things out with some other plugs and things. Obviously, we mentioned our Patreon show, but let's thank some patrons at the end here. If you go to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife, you get bonus episodes, just like Bally mentioned. If you want to get that Game of the Year episode, head over to that site and sign up, and we'll be happy to have you. We have some patrons to thank, Bally.
Yes, thank you to our $10 tier patrons. They are Zach S, Atari Alex, Thomas, Matthew, and my wife Caroline. Thank you all for your $10 tier support. But also thank you to all of our other patrons. It's hugely appreciated, the support you gave, and will give in the future. The show, it's we really appreciate it. And yeah, we just did an episode of this NintendoLife last week, and yeah, we were lucky enough to be joined by my brother at the start, which was an interesting experience. So yeah,
I wonder who that is.
You need to go check that out. And yeah, someone played a lot of Forza. And spoilers, it wasn't me this time, but yeah.
Who could say? Yeah, that was good. Yes, obviously you can. We mentioned we're doing Game of the Year stuff. I think I should probably mention as well, we like to hear your lists for Game of the Year as well. So yeah, do go ahead and email your lists to us. Also, send them to our email address, which Bally will tell you right now.
ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We want your Nintendo list, your non-Nintendo list, and your games of the year that didn't come out this year. We want all those lists, so send them on over.
Yep, you can post those in our Discord as well. We have a thread for emails in there, so send your top 10 lists through that avenue. And yeah, we'll like to take a look. I might also be putting up a bit of a poll so people can say what their favorite games of the year are, and then I might collect those together to get an idea of a consensus community game of the year. So that could be fun and see how that goes.
So many lists.
So as I said, we like lists. Did you know? It's shocking, truly. Yeah, it's good stuff. You can find all of our shows in different places. We are on YouTube, youtube.com/ThisNintendoLife, as well as our Discord that is linked in the show notes. Go and join the community over there and chat with some folks. But also, you can find us on the internet in different places. You can find us on Twitter, where I am at LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I am at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. I posted a little video of a horn in Forza from Ori and the Blind Forest, which I love very much. It's just a hilarious thing, so you need to check that
you
out.
were raging at me a bunch of like, I don't want to get these cosmetics, fuck this horn noise.
Whoa. I said I don't want a pair of trousers.
Okay.
I'm all up for some thematic horns, all right? They'll do me just fine.
Yeah.
And then like the next wheel spin I did after that, I like unlocked one of the rarest cars in the whole game.
Oh,
It's like
great.
it's worth 2.5 million credits, and I got it with a wheel spin.
Oh my God, just winning the lottery here.
Love it.
Too good. Great.
Don't
Obviously, well, yes, it's something you could do if you want to. In a safe environment like Forza Horizon 5, a great place to gamble.
Exactly.
You can obviously find the show on Twitter at TNL Podcast. That's probably where I'll put the poll. So if you want to follow that account, I'll put it there, probably on Discord as well. And you can pop your thoughts on your Game of the Year list there as well. And yes, you can obviously find the show in various places. We are on Stitcher, we are on Apple Podcasts, we are on every podcasting app that you can find. Search for This Nintendo Life, review us, rate us, all the good stuff, and we'd appreciate that greatly if you did so. And yeah, that is about it. That's going to close us out for today's show. I'm going to try and play some more video games, but right now, Bally, all I'm doing is like watching videos about and of the Wheel of Time and rewatching I've watched it like twice now. I watched it. There was a Twitch streamer who they partnered with to do like a live reaction to it, and so I had her on the background watching it along at the same time. I just need the rush, man, of watching people watch the Wheel of Time. I'm waiting for when my sister's around at Christmas. I'll watch it with her. I'm just very excited. This is all I'm thinking about right now. If you saw my YouTube watch history for the last week, I think 90% of my searches are just typing in the Wheel of Time into YouTube. I'm a little bit obsessed.
You don't want to take your eye off the ball, because you need to get your boxing gloves out for Game of the Year, right? We got some fights to get through.
I know, yeah, and that's important, but I will tell you, I have finished 69 games this year. So
why not stop on that number?
No, yeah, nice. So maybe that's a good idea. We'll see. But yes, that's mainly what I'm going to continue to do, I think, and I'm very excited because now every Friday I'll get a new episode, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts when you watch it, Bally. Whenever that is, I would like to chat with you about it. So
yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's going to do us for today. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with more podcasting, more video games, more Nintendo, and Game of the Year. Until then, thanks for listening, folks. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. The musical interlude used on today's show was Shooting Ristar from Ristar. Copyright Sega 1995. Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life, episode 200 and... Fuck, what's the episode? Shit. What number is it? Not 209?
I put it... 210? It's 209. Fuck. I put it at the top of the joint show notes.
God damn, I just need to read the fucking show notes. Alright. Let's rewind. Let's go back. Alright, no, it is 209, okay. I was right. I had my instinct. My gut was there. All right, let's do it. Okay.